I've been preaching for the last 15 years. She said, the Bible's unjust because you can stone an adulterer. And so I said, you know what? I think it's a great thing you can stone an adulterer.
Like, is it ever going to be corrupted?
As Christians, what we look for too is the resurrection of the body. And she's like, oh, that's why the tomb was empty. He rose from the dead. He rose from the dead.
And God loves being with us and slowly rebuilding a broken world.
Young men are kind of like locked in like pornography and video games. This girl with the green hair is just haranguing me. Is there a thing called justice? He should be put to death. And she shut up and sat down.
All right, Forged in Idaho. I'm here with Keith Darrell.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. So I'm really excited to talk to you because I'm always talking to young men. And I know you would humbly decline any comparison to Charlie Kirk, but you're as close to that kind of a guy that I know. You're an on open air campus preacher that's going to campuses. So you're always talking to young men and women as well. And what are they telling you these days?
It's interesting. My pivot point. So I've been preaching for the last 15 years. First time I ever did it was the September of 2000. And there's been a huge evolution, obviously, in the quarter of a century from 2000 to now as a student. And there's been a few, to me, kind of like landmark moments. Obviously, 9/11 was a landmark moment, and that kind of pivoted the culture. Obergefell was another one. And then Bruce Jenner becoming Caitlyn Jenner, the rise of the transgender, then obviously COVID. So there's kind of like these, every few years, there are these, to me, these watershed moments that are coming in. And so for me, one of the big pivots was, I think it was fall of 22. I'm preaching at the University of Kansas, and this girl with the green hair is just haranguing me. She was like a gnat, and it was just driving me nuts. And I remember just thinking, like, get out of here. Like, she's not interested in anything I have to say. And what was interesting, she said, the Bible's unjust because you can stone an adulterer. And so I said, you know what? I think it's a great thing you can stone an adulterer. Think of what an adulterer does. Rips apart his wife and kids, rips apart another family, and our whole social order suffers because he's selfish. He should be put to death. And she shut up and sat down. And I remember throwing the high heat thinking she'll go away. She's going to think I'm nuts by this answer. She's going to go away. So I believe what I just said, but it was one of those things where you kind of like, oh, I'm going to nuance it before I get there. I was like, nope, just going to throw high heat. And so from that point forward, I started just preaching much more on the family, men, women, roles, responsibility. So I saw that from the standpoint that I think young men particularly, and the women I don't have as good of a read on, I think are looking for responsibility, looking for family, looking for some sort of stability. And we kind of see that even in certain Christian circles where people are returning to maybe like a more traditional liturgical service because they want some sort of stability. So I think coming out of COVID kind of upended everything. I think all the family dynamics, all the relational dynamics, everything's up for grabs right now. I think a lot of people are looking for stability. So I say all that from the standpoint that I think the gospel Christianity ends up anchoring the soul for people. And so I've noticed more of an interest in Christianity, and other people kind of play this out, like sale of Bibles are up, church attendance for young men is up, all these sorts of things. So that's what I've kind of noticed, that young people are looking for that level of stability is kind of the main thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, if you look for what that turns into, I see a lot of young men. You know, I'm sure at colleges you especially see this, but they're asking themselves, should I go to college? Do I need to be at college? I'm here at college in your case. And they're looking for what do I need to take responsibility for? A lot of these kids were told you need to go get your graduation so that you can become responsible and take responsibility and go get something done. And they're all of a sudden discovering I can take responsibility for things right now. And they're looking for, how on earth can I bear that responsibility?
Yeah, I know. And I think the problem with young men particularly, and this is all kind of stolen from Jonathan Haidt, is in very broad terms, women have a really tough time through high school from the standpoint of the way they socialize, the way they meet and grow and know one another. But the young men are kind of like locked in like pornography and video games. And so what they're having a tough time doing is at 22 years old, I think he calls it a failure to launch. And so you have this weird place of like, how do I take responsibility in the world? I haven't really taken responsibility for much. And especially in my context, and again, very broad terms, is kids generally come from like, at least economically thriving homes in general. I feel like on college campuses, the young people I'm interacting with seem to come from decent socioeconomic standings. And from there, the environment on a college campus is kind of wild because like you have tons of free time. That's why I show up on a college campus and preach, because like people are like, why do you choose college campuses? Because people have free time. You know what I mean? Like I show up, start preaching. Next thing you know, they sit there for 4 hours. So you kind of have like this weird place where there's almost no responsibility. And I think for some people, they think of college as I'll go in, live chaotically for 4 or 5 years, then I'll go on to maturity after that. And so college is definitely a weird place right now where I think a lot of people are, some are looking for responsibility. Some just see it as a place where you get to do whatever you want. Then once you graduate, you're supposed to become mature and responsible. And so I think, yeah, they're in that weird place where they're not sure where they stand right now. It's kind of one of the main things I've noticed. And preaching the gospel to them and trying to, even last week, was it last week? 2 weeks ago, I was in Nebraska and I spent 2 hours talking to a young black kid who grew up, he was adopted at 13 by a white family, was in and out of foster care. And he was just so mad. Like, he's like, I'm just mad. And I just hate my dad. I hate the world around me. And then the next day, another young man who grew up without a father, young Hispanic guy in Colorado. And he's just asking like real basic advice. Like, well, what do I do about this? What do I do about this? And it was just so fascinating to me. It's stuff like my dad told me growing up that I was just like, well, I have to take responsibility for these things. These guys have never been told that, and they kind of want it. I think, you're 22 years old, you want responsibility, but you're also like, I don't know what to do. And so that's, I feel like the challenge a little bit is I feel like there's an arrested development there that like, how do you help these guys who just grew up with moms? And, I don't have my own son. So it's like, how do I tell this guy to be like, here's what you got to do? And, sometimes I feel like I'm not totally equipped to tell you what to do because I'm not your dad. I'm not close enough to you. I don't know what your gifts are, your talents. And so anyway, I usually just point them back to like a local church that, hey, get involved with these guys. What are you studying? Find somebody in your church, in the community who's 40 years old, have a wife, kids who are successful, be like, how do I get to where you are? I was like, I can only do so much for you, but the main thing you can do is go find that guy of the area you want to study and ask him how to get there, then do whatever he tells you to do. So
when you look across the landscape of all the kinds of kids that you see on a college campus, what are the bars on a graph of what you're seeing? I mean, we think it's not like these are good kids. These are kids who are striving, at least in some sense of society. These are the kids who are trying to be the best that they know how to be. What do they look like as far as beliefs and desire for success?
Yeah, you really have the whole spectrum. So like I was in Missouri a few weeks ago, and you had this table of like young Democratic Socialists of America or something like that. And really was like Freaks and Geeks, if you remember that show, where you just kind of had these kids who were just like kind of social outcasts at some level. What's interesting to me with what I do, because I'm an effing white male, the people who often want to get me is my favorite part about what I do is oftentimes those people come out to get me because I'm an effing white male. And in general, they're not going to step foot in church. They're not going to go to a traditional campus ministry, but they are going to go get the racist, sexist, homophobe in the middle of campus. And so a lot of what I see, if you have a bell curve and you kind of have like your broad swath of middle America, they're just not hardcore Republicans or Democrats, or just kind of middle road. Then you kind of have your conservative kids over here who generally really like me. You know what I mean? So even if they disagree with me, if you remember about 10 years ago when you had like the rise of the alt-right kid, and like they would love me on campus just because I was a little bit of a gadfly. But then you have your left-wing kids, your transgender kids, and your LGBT people. And a lot of what I'm discussing, their 18, 20-year-old is on sexuality. So these people are in the mix a lot. So I would say that's kind of the main spectrum of students that I see. Most of what I'm interacting with in very broad terms is some sort of leftist ideology, because that does kind of dominate the landscape on a college campus. And even these kids, one of the good things with the rise of Charlie Kirk, it's almost like he emboldens some of these kids, like, okay, we can speak up. Whereas a little bit like whack-a-mole, if you're conservative on campus, you put your head up, it's like whack, whack, and so you get back down. And the left has kind of been dominating, I would say, even for 25 years ago when I was on college campuses, the left kind of dominated the landscape. So I'd say that's most of what I see. And then you kind of have just more your stereotypical like fraternity, sorority person, just like white, middle, upper class. They just want to go get a job, work in finance. They think about college football and America in very broad terms. But then you have your more thoughtful people. And when I think of these people out here, kind of the rise of the alt-right, one of the things I enjoyed about 10 years ago, if you remember, man, Jordan Peterson kind of got on the radar about 10 years ago. And the thing even a Ben Shapiro, I can't remember some of those other names that came up, but the main thing they kind of helped was they were almost doing pre-evangelism for me, because they were kind of giving people logic. They're giving people a real world that's pressing down upon them. And that's basically, to be simplistic, the divide is the conservative kid thinks there's a real world that presses down upon them at some level. They might be in rebellion to it, but they're like, no, there's a real world. There's men, there's women. And then you have this group over here that are constructivists, and male and female is socially constructed, race is socially constructed, all laws, morality is socially constructed. So that's really what the divide, like if I was being simplistic and I had to give you two camps, put everybody in, you have the people who think we're in a real world, and you have the people who think the real world's basically clay and we can mold it any way we want. And I've been told numerous times by this group, we can't wait for your type to die out. So when Charlie Kirk was murdered, it wasn't a shock to me, because Charlie Kirk embodies, in this perspective, what's wrong with the world. Because, and like this is what I preach almost every day, is like these left-wing students, you're actually tyrannical. You're no different than every tyrant in history, because every tyrant looks at the world and says, if everybody just obeyed my orders, the world would be great. And these people, it's all in the name of democracy and the people, but it's just like, if the whole world just obeyed our orders, the world would be great. And if they would just listen to us and let us construct the world we want. Whereas if you believe there's a real world that presses down upon you, you see yourself as part of the problem. You can see yourself as part of the problem, and the remedy is not, I get to construct the world any way I want, but we have to submit to what reality is. And so in real basic terms, that's what I think the divide is on a college campus, is the constructivists versus the realists at some level. So
yeah, I remember watching a conversation with Nick Freitas where he was talking about, with another politician, a liberal politician, he was describing, he said, I think your belief system is far more violent than mine. Because if I want to do something good for somebody, I have to rally a whole bunch of people to agree with me. And what you want to do is you want to have a top-down authoritarian say to me, you will do this. Mm-hmm. And the goal then is for us to try to reach these kids and say, okay, is government really a good moral thing? Mm-hmm. Like, is it ever going to be corrupted? Obviously,
yeah,
we agree that it's always going to be.
Yeah.
How do they wrestle with that?
The main thing is, like, the hard part publicly is, in a way, this is easy to deconstruct these people over here, because even the subtle irony that if, is there a thing called justice? So oftentimes I'll want to camp out on language like justice, but if everything's socially constructed, that has to include the concept of justice. And so what they want to do here is say everything's socially constructed, yet there is this transcendent thing called justice that somehow, say BLM, they're not really getting justice, or they're environmental justice or LGBTQ justice. And justice is tagged on everything. But if everything's socially constructed, why do we... So these people are consistent with the standpoint that justice stands outside of us and we got to submit to it, even if it's uncomfortable or we don't like it. These people, even though they're using this terminology, they can't really get there. So how I try to get there is you try to find something that they care about, and then kind of go after it. Like, is this really just socially constructed? So are we just playing American football versus European football? And so if everything's socially constructed, we can play American football, we can play European football. But imagine wanting to go to war over somebody for wanting to play European football or American football. But yet these people, at some level, want to kill, and I've been told that numerous times, can't wait for your type to die out. They want to kill people that disagree with them. So, and they're going to couch it in terms of justice. So what I'm trying to do when I'm on campus is, this isn't the point of Jesus' words, but in Matthew chapter 7, when he says, judge not lest ye be judged. With the measurement you use, we measure down and press that upon you. So I'm just looking for them to bring their measurement forward and then pressing it down upon them. So one of the easiest ways to show that is if you have something like LGBTQ, that interestingly, I don't know the best way to put it. So the LGBT people, they think there's a nature to humanity. So you're a homosexual. So it's some sort of fixed embedded in you. But the Q people say there are no homosexuals. There might be sodomy, but there's no, because you have no human nature. So how can you be a homosexual? Because you're assuming, some sort of nature to humanity. And the Q people say there's no nature to humanity. And that's what they want to do. They want to queer everything. And so there are no norms. And so there's a woman, Gail Rubin, at University of Michigan, and she has a piece called Thinking Sex. And in that, she calls pedophilia intergenerational sex because it's just descriptive of what's going on there. There is no pedophilia. That's a loaded moral term. Also, incest is just taboo and stuff like that. So what she's consistently queer is that there are no norms. And that's the hard part is like, well, how do you even define queer theory if there's no norms? So what I'm trying to do with these people here is get them just to live out their principles consistently. And you realize it can't work. And you guys all know that. And so, yeah, like when you're sexually abused, and I would say that's a very common ministry I have on campus, who I'm amazed the number of people who tell me that, they know that this moral relationship that they experience is not a social construction, and it's not evil because society says so. And that's one of the main debates. So is morality subjective? So think about it, like I'm just drinking water, but if I drink this, like, and I say it's good, and you're like, oh, that's bad water. Are we really saying something true about the water? Or are we saying something true about ourselves? So if I look at an event and say that's evil, am I saying something about that event? Or am I only speaking about myself? And so the constructivists have to say we're saying something about out here. And so when we say that's cruel, the irony of their language is we're not actually saying something about that event. We're talking about my response to that event. And I think that's kind of the problem oftentimes on campus is these kids have all this language, and yet because they've been so disoriented, they can't anchor themselves properly. And so cruelty has happened, injustice has happened, and yet everybody around them is given these ideas that it's all socially constructed. And so I do think what you end up doing is just raging, and you end up hating the world. And I do think, like the guy who killed Charlie Kirk, I think there's an element there where like that's your last wits, because you're sitting there going, cruelty has happened in the world, something's wrong in the world, and then you just kind of find somebody like Charlie and be like, well, he's the scapegoat, he's the problem in the world, and once they go away. But as Christians, I think we have the proper understanding of there's a God, there's a moral law, there's us as sinners, there's also a corporate aspect of humanity being seen, that we have the world, the flesh, and devil. And so anyway, what I'm always trying to do is the dance is Christianity is the truth. And because Jesus Christ rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, C.S. Lewis's line that, I believe in God like I believe in the Son, and it's like I say everything clearly. And I'm trying to show them that all these things that you're wrestling with, and some of them are good, they just end up getting stuff with wrong meaning, has its remedy in Christ, and his death, burial, and resurrection is addressing all these things. And so that's what the dance is throughout the day. I'm not sure if that answered the question. I kind of went tangential. But that's the dance throughout the day is the person I'm talking to, and even the beauty of the gospel is the person I'm talking to is the image bearer of God. So there's always going to be some humanity to them that I can appeal to. So even, the most extreme Hitler. So even Hitler, like if I was to sit down with him, I can find a point of contact of like, here's what's good, here's what's right, blah, blah, blah. And here's where you're in rebellion to your maker. And it's actually that sets us free. Like once you grasp you're in rebellion to your maker, because intertwined with that is the reality of kind of self-righteousness. So when I'm out on campus preaching, students realize, you're so self-righteous. It's like, to be honest with you, I think I'm antithetical to self-righteous, because I'm saying God's the standard of righteous. I'm also saying I have not met the standard of righteous. Mm-hmm. You guys are saying we construct righteousness. And not only that, you guys are racist, sexist, homophobic. You're the bad people. We're the righteous people. Mm-hmm. And so the subtle irony is they end up in their hopes of avoiding self-righteousness, they actually create self-righteousness. Whereas in Christianity, you can have the proper humility of like, there's a creator God, righteous is outside of us, and yet we have to humble ourselves before God. So anyway, that's the dance I'm trying to do all day, every day. And no matter what the issue is, I'm trying to bring it back to the reality that Jesus Christ, Colossians 1, he holds all things together. So the only way we can have a meaningful conversation on math, sex, justice, whatever it is, because Jesus of Nazareth created the world, died, buried, resurrected, and now here we are in light of that. So that's what I'm trying to do.
So like to get to that, you're obviously going to have to create the notion that they might actually be confused. You're going to have to deconstruct what they actually believe and show the holes in it. How do most kids take that?
They're kind of fundamentalists. So think of like the fundamentalist kid who's like, someone's like, I don't believe the Bible. And they're like kind of beside themselves. Like, and so they haven't been challenged generally. So they often get really pissed, to be honest with you. They often get really, really mad when you go after their idols. They get pissed. But it's in a sense, it's an easy game. Part of it's like, I say it's an easy game, but it might just be that I'm immersed in that area. But so, for example, just because sex comes up so often on a college campus, when the Me Too thing was big, consent was kind of the name of the game. And so what I want to do when I go out there is whatever rule they put forward. So there's two dances. You have the big dance That's the cultural thing that I'm trying to deconstruct. So I'm on a college campus, consent's the sexual norm. So you guys are telling me that if you have a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old adults and they consent to sex, that it's moral. Yes. So if that 20-year-old is the son of the 40-year-old, is it still moral? How dare you bring it? That's totally different. I was like, well, then you just told me two consenting adults. And so consent can't be the rule, but then they bring in power dynamics and gets in a little longer discussion. But if you get to feminism, there are strands of feminism that because we're in a patriarchal system, we're never really sure if women are properly consenting to men because there's a power differential, and especially if you have successful men. You know what I mean?
You got to have an app.
Yeah, yeah. So we gotta, yeah. So we have to. Are we really equal at this point? And so what I'm trying to do is, because all I'm trying to do there, if you look at it, is take their measurement, press down upon them. But what I want to show is because their standard is not the true God, it can't be lived out in the real world. And so as Christians, obviously we think consent plays a role. We think power dynamics play a role, but it's not the absolute norm. God himself is the absolute norm. So you have the big component. When I'm out there, I'll go after consent. You know what I mean? So or even when BLM was the thing, I did, as I came on your campus, I saw you had a big sign that said BLM, blah, blah, but here we are. Can I have you atheists? Can I have you agnostics? Can I have you Democrats? Tell me why Black Lives Matter. And then they kind of lose their minds. It's like, how dare you even, and you can't even ask the question. But the thing with them is, no, as a Christian, I can sit back and say they matter. You know what I mean? But I'm just asking you, atheists and agnostics, why do they matter? And they can't give you, the thing is, they can't give you an answer. And that's, there's a guy, Lipton, wrote a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, which was a study of like the communist Chinese. And what you realize they've been giving is what's called thought terminating cliches. So we'll just say racist, sexist, then we just have to end all discussion. And that's really where they're at. It is, you're almost like dealing like with a religious cult. And so the dance you have to do is take the big one, kind of get some emotion involved. And then on the more personal level, I always think of this young woman at Colorado State University. She was a lesbian, just kept haranguing me on the lesbian thing. And finally I was like, can we just set that aside for a second? I was like, when you think of America, is it healthy? And she's like, no. When you think of Colorado State University, is it healthy? No. When you're laying in your bed, you're not arguing with a street preacher. Are you healthy? And she's like, no. And I was like, all right, now we can talk about whatever the issues are. You know what I mean? So that's the dance. You have the big corporate level where I'm trying to push back on the meta narratives that they have. Then you have the individual before you that is like caught up in sin and somewhat legitimately wrestling with things. So the way I kind of go about it is, try to find that point of contact, be it consent, be it Black Lives Matter. On campus, it's equality or diversity, and I'll usually tap one of those two things because equal things are never diverse things are never equal. So what do you guys want here? So I'm trying to find whatever their cliche is, attack it of why it can't sustain itself. And then when I'm dealing with an individual, I'm trying to basically get at the root of them. And it is some element, like almost everybody's willing to admit, like one-on-one, that like, yeah, I messed up. You know? And part of the challenge is like, because we're so therapeutic, they might be too quick to get there, and their problem is something more therapeutic rather than moral. And that kind of ties in, we can discuss it a little bit, but one of the things I try to go after, your primary problem in your life is moral, not your mental health. It's your moral health. But no wonder you're mentally chaotic, because if you're part of hookup culture, you get ghosted, you're never meant to live that way. And so now you're mentally depressed and anxious because you're morally chaotic. And so that's but in our culture, we're just like, oh, we just have this chemical imbalance and we're just something therapeutic happened. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to go after. But to sum it up, the big narrative, you're trying to go after whatever cliche they put forward as being the absolute norm. Because it's not God, I want to deconstruct it. But then you have the particular individual before you and like what's really going on here. And so, the girl who's a lesbian is just trying to get at her to admit that, like, all right, lesbianism is just fruit of a tree. You know what I mean? So the works of the flesh are blah, 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 blah. All right, let's get at the trunk sometimes. And that's kind of one of our responsibilities in preaching is and evangelizing is we do have people before us that like can't hear us. And my job every day is like, all right, I have to communicate these people. I can throw up and, troll everybody and get a mob going if I wanted to every day. But what I'm trying to do is like poke them, but yet still want them to hear me. And that's kind of the challenge in an open format like that. So
yeah, break them down to rebuild them. What about, it was such a blessing to me, the documentary, How to Answer the Fool by Sight.
Bruno, yeah.
Bruno, yeah. He'll give us grace on his last name. That was such a blessing to watch that and see just the ability to articulate to kids that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And we all know it. And even they know it. And I would assume that, yeah, that would really result in a lashing out. But once you rebuild that, what are the percentage of what is the percentage of people that can hear you at the end of a day?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How I usually think of it is it's actually, even it's not that day, it's over the next 6 months when they go back to their dorm. So I preach, I'm kind of like breaking up the fallow ground. They're going back to their dorm to argue with people. So like from where I sit, most of the fruit I see is like a year later, year and a half later. I was on a campus, I return, someone goes back to their dorm, and they start having conversations with Christians in their dorms, like, "Hey, you see the crazy guy in front of the library?" And then they start having that conversation. So I would say that the challenge really is like in the moment. If I could talk about my day, it's you kind of have an arc. So I start right around the noon hour, and my goal is to go until no one wants to listen to me, which is generally 4:30, 5 o'clock most days. Every now and then we can go later. But what I'm trying to do in the first 3 hours is build as big of a crowd as possible. So I'm throwing a little bit more hot takes and trying to get people to go get their lunch and come back, skip their class, come back. And then around 3:30, it's kind of like panning for gold. You start to shake out the people who just want to mock, jeer. They begin to leave. And then I have a chair with me. I sit down in my chair. And it's kind of even funny, the social dynamics of things like a chair. I sit down in a chair, everybody slows down. If I'm having trouble getting a crowd, say I hop up on kind of platform and people are like, they just hate the idea that you would be above them and like look down on them and preach to them as if you're judging them. But it's kind of like classic counseling. You go in the principal's office, he raises his chair higher, so you're looking up at him. And so those dynamics. So around 3:30, you begin to shake it out. And then you usually, most days, you probably have about 20 kids, I would say, and some of them are believers that are genuinely interested in what's going on. And other people might be interested, they left for whatever reason. And what I'm trying to do there is encourage Christians to be bold, like, don't shrink back on this campus. Like, we have answers, and they're largely manipulative. They're going to call you names. Don't worry about being called a racist. Don't worry about being called sexist, whatever. But then the unbeliever, it's almost a little bit more counseling at that point, where you'd be surprised at how open students are over, here's what my life is like, here's what's happened to me, where was God? And what's interesting, most of my discussions nowadays, very rarely is with straight up atheists. It's always, all right, there probably is a God, but if there is a God, when I was 2 to 6, I was sexually abused. Where was God when that happened? And so, which is not an unreasonable question. And they're like, yeah, I would often pray or whatever, and I didn't feel like God answered my prayers. So that's usually the final end of the day. So, and that's probably my favorite part is the last hour and a half. We probably roughly 20, 25 kids that I think are genuinely interested. Some are believers, some are not. And so, yeah, so percentage wise, it's kind of hard to give you an answer, but I would say most of the fruit I see is very much downstream. I'm on campus one semester, I return a year later. I've gotten emails 5 years later, things like that. So that's so as far as immediate fruit, if I see immediate fruit, it's a guy who grew up in the Christian church, living like the devil on campus, and he heard me say something. He's like, man, I'm rejecting my faith, and so I have to return. So most of the immediate fruit is that. So
one of the things I've always loved about the trades is it's just a constant contact with the real world. You can measure it, you can repeat it, you can look at it when you're done working on it. And the spiritual world is, for most people, very disconnected from that. But as a Christian builder, obviously I tie them together, and we joyfully build things for the glory of God. And I would think that your ability to show these kids how tightly that is connected, your physical interaction with the world is directly related to your spiritual understanding of it, is something they've never confronted. But man, if we can harness that, what a powerful thing it is.
And the challenge actually is Christians on that point, because most of us think Jesus lives in my heart, the real world is kind of irrelevant. So most of the challenge there, actually, one of the worst moments, it was on the same campus. One of my favorite moments, one of my worst moments happened on the same campus. And all this ties in, so that physicality is setting aside Chuck Darwin for a second. Like, we lost a doctrine of creation. Like, we kind of have a doctrine of creation only in terms of debating evolutionists. We don't think of it as like, God made the physical world, and sex is good, and being a husband's good, and being a mother's good, and bearing children's good, and go be fruitful and multiply. Like, we're totally detached from that. So creation is only debated in the context of a young earth, old earth, but no one's really developing a doctrine of creation. So I think that's one of the problems in evangelicalism, is it's almost just an apologetic playground more than anything else. And then the incarnation as well in evangelical circles, we so heavily emphasize the divinity of Jesus that we almost take away his humanity. Like, we acknowledge it, we know it's supposed to be there, But the reality that God himself became a man, took on flesh and blood, not only that he was died, buried, and then resurrected and ascended, now there's flesh and blood at the right hand of God the Father. There's a true human. Like, that radically reorients your whole perception of the physical world. And I think it helps us address like the transgenderism and all that sort of jazz. So I think you're absolutely right that my challenge when I'm out there is I'm being eminently physical, and many evangelicals hate that idea. Jesus lives in our heart. Don't worry about these things. As long as you just love God, like, it's just this abstraction. So, and how it ties in on a campus at Cal State Fullerton, I was preaching, and there was a young man there. I was preaching the physical resurrection of the body, and I always hit myself. I was like, I don't believe in the immortality of the soul. I believe in the resurrection of the body, and I believe the soul exists post, if I die, so I have some sort of conscious existence. I don't know what that is. The emphasis is the physical body. And these Christians start yelling at me, it's a spiritual body, which they took as being non-corporeal. And then the whole crowd turned on me. And I remember thinking, these guys are so wicked. One guy was wicked. I remember one guy, I think this guy's a believer who's just confused. I think this kid's just wicked. And the one kid who I thought was wicked was boasting, and it turned the whole crowd on us. And it did. Like, huge monster crowd, and I was like, they're gonna kill me. This place is gonna kill me. And so anyway, I decided to shake the dust off my feet, pack up. I was like, you guys go back, ask your pastors if we believe in the resurrection body. What you did today was wicked. And the kid who I thought was a believer came back a week later, and he apologized to me. He's like, I want to apologize. I went to my pastor. I told him what I did, and he told me I should keep my mouth shut. I don't know what I'm talking about. And then the other kid, I remember him coming through, never apologized, never spoke to me, who I thought was like, I don't think that guy's a believer. But on that same campus, there was a young woman there who, she's like, I believe man has a soul, but what is it? Tell me about the soul. I was like, well, I think the emphasis on the Bible is the resurrection of the body, not the soul. So as Christians, what we look forward to is the resurrection of the body. And she's like, oh, that's why the tomb was empty. He rose from the dead. He rose from the dead. And so when you just have this spiritual reality of the soul going off into worlds unknown to, commune with God the Father, and you negate the resurrection, Jesus' resurrection is almost like a parlor trick. Like, dead men don't rise, Jesus rose from the dead, therefore Jesus was God. And then he probably shed that body anyway because he returned to being God. Whereas, the Christian gospel is no, God loves the world, and it's physical creation. And so I think that's and that's even where there was a woman, Louise Perry, who was kind of a Marxist, British social critic, but kind of conservative socially. And over the summer, I think she became a believer because she said, I realized Christianity was sociologically true, so it must be true. And I think and that's the strength of our position. Like, it's true. And so that even ties into what a man is, what a woman is, what your physical body is. And as long as we keep pounding that home, I think, we have an advantage over everybody, on the physical reality of what we're saying. And then from there, it also, atheism ultimately isn't satisfying. So it also satisfies the religious component of what man needs. And so, because it's true, it touches into both of those dynamics.
We always fail to recognize like how strong of a weapon we have, right? We have the Bible, we have Christ who exists in a body elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's out over there, not here with a body. Like that's just such a insanely powerful thing that we always fail to give credit to.
Yeah, and we think about that, like if you ever read Acts and just think about that, like 7 weeks ago, so they start preaching on the day of Pentecost, roughly 7 weeks before Jesus was crucified, died, buried, resurrected. He hung out with them for 40 days, and he sends to heaven. The Holy Spirit comes, and they're just like, this Jesus whom you've crucified. So imagine like J6 happens and someone gets killed, the government puts someone down, and then 50 days later, like, oh yeah, he rose from the dead, and this is the way we fix the world. You know what I mean? It's like this Jew that was hung upon a cross, hung upon a tree, he's the one that's fixing the world. And you can see why everybody thought they were insane. You know what I mean? But they're like, no, he rose from the dead. And then from there, like, it's kind of funny. Jesus' words to Thomas, where he's like, blessed are you, but blessed are those who have not seen. And I'm kind of like, I almost feel like it's easier 2,000 years later. Because I feel like I
agree.
Yeah, because I feel like in the mix, you're kind of like,
this is so easy.
and like, even think about it as a Jew, like you're like, now what do we do with Moses? What do we do with circumcision? What do we do with the temple? Like, I feel like I have it much easier. The temple's destroyed. Jesus, the high priest. Like, I feel like it's much easier 2,000 years later to believe this stuff. But yeah, but that's what we have. And they were just preaching Jesus of Nazareth, whom you killed, like a real man. And I just feel like sometimes we treat Jesus as like the second person of the Trinity, which just becomes this, non-corporeal spiritual being. But no, it was God in the flesh. And it is hard maybe to bring it all together, but it also just makes your prayer life more like, it's like if you were to petition the president of just like, hey, we need A, B, C, F, G. So I'm going to King Jesus. He has all authority on heaven and earth. Hey, I need A, B, C, F, G. And then I have no qualms thinking he can provide. You know what I mean? If Donald Trump was my father, I'd be like, hey, Dad, I need this. And you're like, okay, he can provide. So, being a Christian, like, hey, Dad, I need this. And it's kind of like, okay, he can provide. So it also just gives you, to me, it gives me greater confidence even in prayer. Realize that Jesus, the mediator, has a hand on the Father, a hand on me, and is reconciling the parties.
It's, the work that you're doing in a very similar fashion of just being a builder or in any kind of construction is the cheerfulness comes in recognizing that all of the broken pieces, all of the failures, all of the breakdowns in suppliers, the communication problems, like all of these things are normal. And God loves being with us in slowly rebuilding a broken world. And the joy that we have in just dealing with that is, I think, probably one of the most infectious things, right? I understand your story. I hear how bad you were abused. And yet, let me offer you laughter in the face of it.
And even I've been telling students more recently like they're now survivors and just be like, that's not your identity for the rest of your life. Like something evil has happened to you, but your whole identity going forward is not that event. You know what I mean? And I even think like our rise of psychology that puts so much on that single event for the rest of our life. Like I think there's going to be some element of bitterness, like you're holding on like that. Obviously it should not have happened to you. It has happened to you, but now what's your relationship to it? And I think as a Christian, we even from the standpoint of judgment, the idea that there's a final judgment, like the person who's done evil to you, you'd be like, all right, Jesus, I'm going to trust you with final judgment. I may not get it in this age. I may not get justice from the state of Oregon or the state of Idaho or the federal government, but Jesus, you will judge the world in righteous. So I think even that component psychologically gives us freedom from the evil that has happened to me can be redemptive rather than just, a world turning forth of superfluousness. And I think it's the unbelieving man, they don't, without the aspect of final judgment, I think they kind of just get locked in and bitter to that moment rather than the freedom of even something that people hate is the idea of judgment. It actually is a freeing event for the Christian because it sets us free from needing vengeance in this age. And I can look to God and Jesus be like, okay, he loves the world perfectly. He'll take care of it.
Also to trials, like these kids, they're looking for trials to be eliminated. And it's in a sense from society, right? Your most liberal kid wants to basically make sure everybody is at least decently provided for and no one to have to struggle. What do they do when you say, the struggle is actually part of the point?
They just, that's kind of the hard part is they actually hate that part. And that's where they hate God the most. They rage against God because the world that God has us in is not the world they would want. You know what I mean? So they want this almost like, not Teflon, what's the world? Almost like a stainless steel world where like nothing, there's no rust, there's no decay, there's no anything. So what they either want is like the original creation or they want the eschaton and they want to ignore the fall and what's going on in between. And, if you look at Marxism, it's really just like a Christian heresy in a way. And they kind of have an eschaton and the world pops out perfect on the other side once the proletariat overthrows the bourgeoisie and all that sort of stuff. So, but that's actually the thing that they hate the most. And steal something from Jordan Peterson. He was doing an interview, Andy No, I think is the guy's name, kind of like an Asian dude that, he'd cover like Antifa and stuff like that. And Andy No was asking him about the mob violence. And he's like, what is this mob violence? It almost seems animalistic. And Jordan Peterson's like, they're worse than animals. They're worse than animals. Human beings have a kink in them that when they really get going, it's just destructive. And he goes, you know what it is? You really want to know what I think it is? It's revenge against God for the crime of being. It's Cain. And I was just like, yeah, that's really what it is. Yep. So when you're watching Portland burn and you're looking at these Antifa people, they just hate reality and they hate their physical existence. That's why it's all marred. They hate the world around and they're not building towards it. They just want to burn everything. And so the building analogy is like perfect. Like the Christian wants to build. Like you look at Charlie Kirk getting killed. What's the response? Let's pray. Let's build. I remember I was preaching at Montana when Charlie was killed. I stopped preaching. I drove. I stopped to get a beer because I was crying. And I was like, just thinking about it. But I woke up Thursday morning. I was like, I want to build. All right, let's build. And I text some guys here, Sean Patterson being one of them. And he's like, yeah, I want to build. And so everybody who I spoke to coming out of it, whereas like you look at the left, what's their response? Oh, let's burn it all down. You know what I mean? Let's flip the table, take our ball and go home. So I think that component is one of the main challenges is, I still hold to the depravity of man where barring the grace of God, men and women love darkness rather than light. So Jesus in John 3 God loves the world, but he goes on to say that men and women love darkness rather than light. And once that hatred of God gets in there, and I've even seen it with people who've grown up in the church or in the church, and something happens to them, and that bitterness takes over, and they just end up resenting God and hating the world around them. And I think that's actually the main difficulty. Kind of like I said earlier, is that students are almost willing to grant God exists. Very rarely do I debate a straight up atheist. But then it's like, what sort of God do we have? And one thing I do try to pound home is in 1 John 1, God is light, in him there is no darkness at all. So if you hang out with me long enough, you're going to find darkness in me. If anybody you hang out with, you're going to, but I would say with God, actually the challenge is sometimes he might seem hidden from you, but he's light. There is no darkness at all in him. So there's not some malicious part of him that might get you. You know, especially if you come from a context of abuse where your father is not what he's supposed to be and you're doing your theology through your father. How can I trust God the Father? And there's a certain level of legitimate question to that. But what I'm trying to pound home is no, this light. There's no darkness there. And sometimes when you're coming out of a hellscape of relationships, it's hard to even on a very basic level trust somebody else. So I think that's the main challenge is the world that people want. All you can do is revenge against God for the crime of being. I think is the perfect way to sum it up because they're angry at their existence because they can't orient it. And just a kind of aside, I was studying Hebrews. So I just got done with a study through Hebrews, now First Peter, and it's all about suffering. And Jesus was perfected through suffering as a son, and even as children. God's disciplining us. And so anyway, it's just that real world component. And that I kind of love it. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, even the idea that I get to show up on a college campus, hoot and holler about Jesus, and the eternal destinies of people are changing over something so stupid as a middle-aged dude. Man, all right, students are reading from God's holy word, the Bible. And I begin to preach. Next thing you know, they're there for 4 or 5 hours. I get an email 6 months later, hey, I became a believer. Yeah, if you're God, are you going to do that? You know what I mean? All the kids want some light show and some big display. They don't want God coming to meet them through a man preaching the word. They don't want a God who was crucified on a cross. And so the main challenge is they've inverted who God is, what God should be doing, what God should be like. And then what we have, as Paul says, the foolishness of the gospel. Jews demand signs and wonders. Greeks seek wisdom. We preach Christ crucified. And so that's kind of what we have at the end of the day.
Yeah, the power of Charlie Kirk's martyrdom was obviously insane. You're talking about it, you're like, okay, I'm ready to build. I think all of us, especially men, were just like, okay, it's time to get on mission. Mm-hmm. And then the memorial happens, and Erica forgives the killer. Mm-hmm. How much more powerful was that for you as a preacher than the killing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just the whole narrative, like from the day he was murdered until even now, and just seeing the fruit of what's happened, and you have a widowed woman being and that's the challenge of the gospel that we genuinely have. I don't think people make fun of Trump. I think Trump was partially joking, you know what I mean? But I would be much more in the category of I still hate the guy, you know what I mean? And I'm angry, and there'd have to be and more reforms. So I'd probably pull some element of well, he hasn't asked for forgiveness, so I'm not gonna blah blah blah. And so you kind of have that component. But you see from his murder through the memorial, and I actually went out to the memorial. 2 guys were like, "Hey, we meet us out there." So I went out, and you're just it was amazingly Christ-centered, and even and then with her component of saying that, even the thing that's kind of interesting is it kind of neuters everybody who wants to make Charlie a moral monster. You know what I mean? He was murdered, and the response of all the alleged moral monsterness of him and his camp is, we forgive a murderer. And you just see the foolishness of the inversion of the narrative that we're the left, we're really the righteous ones, but the righteous ones are actually the ones who are we're forgiving because we ourselves are sinners. God's forgiven us. And that radically reorients your whole being to the world. If you realize you've been forgiven by God, we love much because we've been forgiven much. And from there, you can be forgiving towards really evil people. And so I think Erica Kirk, I haven't seen tons of her aside from I watched her right after the murder. She did a brief little Fox thing, and then I saw her at the event. I haven't seen her in any other context, but she seems pretty mature, pretty well composed for, and who knows, I'm sure she's shattered in her personal life.
I think she's back to grieving, but her ability to step up to the moment and do what really her husband would need her to do. That's what was the most impressive thing in the face of a world of women who have no idea what actual feminine courage looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just seems like such a useful thing on a campus with men and women to show there was a man on mission, there was a wife who was willing to continue the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you how you can have that kind of thing.
And even again from 10,000 feet, you could tell he loved her, she loved him, she respected him. You know what I mean? Like, and I think even that has to be a witness to tons of people being like, because not everybody has a good, healthy model. You know what I mean? So just look at Charlie Kirk, who's a productive man, and see his wife really respect him. I think of they were doing an interview. I don't remember the exact context, but she's like, I'm gonna have a tough time talking to you this whole time. She's like, I just enjoy looking at you or something like that. And it was just kind of like, oh man, here's a woman who really respects her husband, and she loves him, and he loves her. And so I think even that testimony as well is, everybody's flooded with videos of him, her, and the thing that's even funny is like suddenly we're flooded with videos of him. We realize he's like I will admit I throw some bare knuckle punches on him out there. It's like Charlie's kind of like he's very even-handed. There's nothing in there that I think is too spicy. You know what I mean? Like I think he's pretty safe. He's always thoughtful. Whereas like I'm trying to throw some bare knuckle punches here or there, and so I've been impressed with everything I've seen of him a year ago to now, and then now his wife as well.
So what's next for you as you continue to pursue these kids on campus and preach the gospel to them?
Mm-hmm.
Who needs to come in behind them? You obviously you refer them to a church.
Mm-hmm.
What responsibility do we have as, if I'm a business owner and there's these college kids who are just trying to figure out what to do with their degree, what's the next level of responsibility we have behind you?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part with what I do. I think people always ask about like follow-up or something like that. I think the hardest part is the baton pass. So even, just say in our context, if Doug's preaching, someone goes up, hey, Doug, I have a question for you. I can't believe it, but Keith can. They're like, who's Keith? You know what I mean? They feel like they know Doug. And so it was interesting to me. I remember being out here a couple of years ago, and there was someone from our community with me out on campus, and I was about to head out of town. I was like, I won't be here, but they can meet with you. And they're kind of like, I want to meet with you. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be out of town. So the baton pass is kind of the hardest thing. But I think there are two things. I try to point people back to a local church or a campus ministry. Because one thing that kind of stemmed with COVID, it changed so many dynamics. Like so many people left ministry, so many campus ministries went under. Like it really upended a lot of college ministries. But what you have, and I think this is the hard part, in general with college students, is their life is kind of like in a silo. It's like everything is college students. And even when I was in college, I didn't know how much I wanted to hang out with people in the community. I had my friends and we're like, I got 4 years to hang out with these people. I just want to hang out with my friends. But what I do think you have, what things that can be done is kind of like what I recommend to young men was go find a guy who does what you want to do and say, how do I get there? And do whatever he tells you to do. And I would say, so similarly, I think men in the church, if there are people, even something as basic, they're going to take you up on it. If you see new students that's visiting your church, just say, hey, you want to come over for lunch or whatever it is, or even if you guys go out to lunch, whatever your family does. And if you have a family, everybody's like, oh, we want to protect, which is fine. But, invite them over. Then from there, find out where these people are headed, where they want to go. And then even if you can't immediately help them, I'm sure there's probably people within our community or in another church community that can point people back to those things. So that's what I would say is the main thing that young people need is like real basic life advice. Like I told you about the young black guy and the Hispanic guy who grew up without that. Like I'm giving them like real basic advice, like just go ask the girl out. You know what I mean? Like we're not doing high level math here. And so I think there's a lot of guys in our community that can do those things. So that's what I would encourage guys to do. Find a guy at church who shows up. They look like some young college students who go out and invite them to lunch. And then from there, just find out what they're studying. And if you can't help them immediately, point them to some people who can. Because if we're trying to build, one of the best things we can do is, if they're going to be an accountant, lawyer, whatever it is point them in the direction of doing that. So that would be one of the main things from where I sit that we can do. And I think college ministries, in a very broad rule, need to move away from the pietism. That's very much what I had. Like I love that I'm doing what I'm doing, but I really just thought when I was converted going into college, and then it was either just go on the mission field. Like everything else, the world's burning. You know what I mean? Just save as many souls as you can. And so I love what I'm doing, so I don't poo-poo it, but there is an element, like I loved econ when I was in undergrad, but I kind of thought like, oh, well, that's all this worldly stuff. What I really want to do is heavenly things. So I think college ministries, the other thing I would encourage college ministries to become more practical. And even what I mean by that, sometimes I used to think it was legalistic in Reformed world. You have this hard law gospel dichotomy. A lot of Christians have that. But when Paul writes letters to people, they're always like, what do they call it? Not topical. They're situational. So there's something going on in Corinth. Like you read the Corinthian letters, like stop sleeping with your stepmother, stop visiting temple prostitutes, stop getting drunk at the Lord's Supper. You know what I mean? Like it's not what you think of as a typical
achievable goal.
yeah, like very achievable. But if Corinth was down the street from there, like that's not a Christian church. Those people are nuts. And Paul's like, dear saints, you know what I mean? And but the practical aspect of the way they're living, I think oftentimes like we just need to be more practical in that sense. Like it's not spirituality is not just like your heart fluttering for Jesus. It's all right. How do I go build and how do I go take responsibility for my budget, my finances? Like all these things are godly and they're this worldly, and they're not be tons of biblical exposition on it, but you can take principles and build them down. And had you talked to me 20 years ago, I would have bucked against that because I would have had a hard law gospel dichotomy. I always just thought, oh, well, that instruction is just moralizing. But I think we're able to get away with it because a lot of people are just being discipled by their families to do these things. And it's kind of like the classic joke, like, oh, we come out of high school and we don't know how to do taxes or register to vote or do any of these things. Like there's just real practical, real world things I feel like Christianity misses, education system misses, and that there's a need for it. And so I just even like look at that, like in our church community, what are the things that people need that are just very practical, and from there do root it in not just like in a beeline from here's who Jesus is, therefore have a budget, but how do we think through money as Christians? And then from there you have a budget and you're responsible and those sorts of things. So that's where I would say the two areas that need to be done is clear vision for a young man of where he's headed, and then similarly just very practical advice on here's what you got to do. You got to have a budget and be responsible and stuff like that. And I think our community does a pretty good job with that. The guys around here, but when I'm on a college campus, you'd be surprised at how irresponsible. And I was totally irresponsible. So it's hard to be judgmental. I was completely irresponsible in college. I was a new Christian, and I really just thought all that matters is being spiritual. So all this other budgeting and finance stuff is just for the birds, and I'd want to pivot on that.
So I'm always talking to the young men and probably a couple of young women out there that didn't go to college, right? I'm talking to tradesmen primarily. But closing thoughts for you, if you're talking to somebody who is at college and you want to give them a final piece to just kind of expound on what you just said, like what do they need to do and what do they need to focus on as they finish out their 4 years or however many years and go into the workforce? What's your advice?
It might seem a little abstract at first, but I really think it is like, what was Adam's role in the world and how has Christ restored that? And so as you think of what Adam's role was in the world, how Christ has restored it, and then from there, how has Christ restored you to whatever that role is to exercise dominion over the world? And so if you're a young man, think about this. I do think very basic things is if you're 18 years old, you're probably, if you're average American at 18 years old, you're not prepared to be married. What you want to think through is 4 years from now, I want to be able to be married. I want to be able to go out and have a real job. Don't treat those 4 years as just a weird transition phrase and I'll pick up here. Like use that as like your period of like, all right, I got 4 years to get my life together, my act together. And that is what Adam's responsibility was. So in simple terms, Adam would have eventually been able to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You had to have a period of submission, I believe, to God. So use this period, these 4 years, get involved in your church, submit to some people who have a very clear vision of where you need to get. And you want to think through the next 4 years of, I want to come out of here mature. So as we started off the conversation, I think I mentioned Jonathan Haidt and the failure to launch of young men. You have 4 years to write and repent from the previous 8 years of your life. And you want to be able to launch. When you're 22 years old, you get your diploma. All right, I'm launching in the world. That hopefully means probably a wife, kids, not might be able to buy a home, but that would say that's the main thing you want to focus on. And so it's kind of like, all right, I'm coming out at 22 years old. I'm looking at the world and I know exactly who I am, what I'm doing, what Christ has called me to. And then from there, you become a lot more free. And so that's what I would try to encourage too, is like, what has God called you to? It's exercising dominion. And it's going to look totally different for every guy. But that's what you want to spend the next 4 years on. You want to be one of the young men that's able to launch at 22 years old. And the way to do that, I think, is reflect upon who Adam was, reflect on what Christ has done, and now what he's called you to do. That'd be the main thing I'd push him towards.
Launch now.
Launch now, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it really does mature to the place where you're like, yeah, because, like, again, self-criticism is like college was kind of like, I just went to college because my parents were like, you just go to college. I didn't.
Yep.
I had no vision. You know what I mean? I was like, I don't know what I want to study. I don't know what I want to do. And I kind of wish someone would have come along and been like, you need a lot of clarity on where you want to go, what you want to do. You know what I mean? And no one would have told you that. Because like, as long as you're, I was reading the Bible a lot and I was zealous. So people were just encouraging me, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're doing great. It was just like, I had no idea what I was doing. You know what I mean? And so, and all things that the hard part with a guy like me at my age, if someone would have came along and been telling me. So anyway, if you're listening to me and you're kind of like, oh, I like his zeal. Like I was probably too zealous at that age to really hear the mundaneness of the Christian life. You know what I mean? I wanted to, you read, you can't help but to read the book of Acts, but like, I want to participate in that. You know what I mean? And the reality of it is like the apostles are unique. Moses was unique. You know what I mean? The overwhelming majority of us, like I'm a preacher. Like my life's pretty mundane actually. You know what I mean? I wake up, read the Bible, I go out and I preach. And there's some fun stories and stuff like that, but it's not a superhero sort of thing. Whereas like, I think when I read Acts, you kind of have this idea that there's this really hyper spirituality. And anyway, that's what I wanted when I was young. So I'm not sure if I would have been able to hear the advice of someone like me. So I would encourage you, like if you're a zealous guy like I was, and you think this stuff is worldliness, it's not. Worldliness is much more moral in nature. It's not the physicality and those sorts of things. So that'd be one of the things I'd want to correct. But that's why it goes back to Adam. Like this physical world is a good thing, and him exercising dominion, Christ dying, rising, ascending, now having all authority under heaven and earth is a good thing. So that's the thread from the very beginning of the Bible to the very end of the Bible, and you will be resurrected in your physical body. So your problem's not the physical world. I would have thought the problem was the physical world. So buck against that that idea, because that's what spirituality was. I was more than you probably want right now, but I started getting into like transcendental meditation prior to my conversion, and I had some weird spiritual experiences. I remember just thinking like, man, if I could just escape this body, escape this world. And anyway, I brought that over to my Christianity. I wasn't able to totally negate it. And it took years of reflecting on creation and incarnation to kind of overcome it. And I still have, if you were able to lay me down on the couch, I still have cognitive dissonance because it was so ingrained in me. You know what I mean? And so intellectually, I'm telling you things that emotionally I haven't totally brought up to because I know that reality. My instinct is much more pietistic. This is who I am. So, but within that, I'd want to encourage everybody outside of that to get away from it. I know what the problems it bears for people are, and there's a better way to live. So
yeah, these are young kids. They're the most resilient kids. You're the most resilient you'll be in your life. We just podcasted with Stephen Haney, and he made that point. He's like, this is where you can fail. Go get something done in the physical world, and don't make it abstract.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So love God, love your neighbor. Pretty basic stuff. It's all moral in nature. It's not a huge emotional thing. Love God, love your neighbor, and be faithful to Jesus. So
love it.
Yep.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.